and all. Respected keynote speaker Sri Kiran Bettatpur, advocate and attorney from Bangalore, and distinguished delegates. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to this national level webinar organized by the IQVC. From the series of webinars, we have come up with again with a novel and important topic, that is intellectual property rights. When it comes to intellectual property rights, not everything that glitters is gold. I strongly believe that intellectual property rights need to be protected. I welcome today's keynote speaker, Sri Kiran Bettatpur, advocate and attorney of Bangalore. I wholeheartedly welcome all the delegates for the national level webinar on intellectual property rights. I hope this session too supports your expectations. With these words, I conclude by wishing the program grand success. Thank you.
Warm morning to one and all. I am Professor Farooq Sheikh from Department of Commerce, KD Society's Jagat Guru Gangadhar College of Commerce, Hooghly. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome and introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Kiran Bettatpur, advocate and the patent attorney from Bangalore. Sir invests in early stage startups and is a qualified company secretary ICSI. He specializes in corporate matters, mergers and acquisitions, company valuation, patent litigation, property rights, and international trade law. He enjoys teaching and delivers lectures regularly in schools and colleges. He is equally earnest about legal activism and the constitutional reforms. His first book, Gita, and The Art of Selling was nominated for the Crosswords Book of the Year award. I once again welcome our beloved principal, keynote speaker, and all the delegates for today's national webinar. With this, I present before you Mr. Kiran Bettatpur.
Good morning, delegates and all the audience who are with us today for this national webinar on intellectual property rights. This is just in brief, but there's a lot to explore in deep. So let's welcome our today's keynote speaker, come resource person, Kiran Bettatpur, sir, advocate and patent attorney from Bangalore. We welcome you, sir.
Good morning to all of you. The topic that I'm going to be speaking on is a very fascinating topic, intellectual property rights. I'm an engineer by qualification. Right now, I'm a practicing advocate. I worked as a sales and marketing professional in the corporate world. I also was a serial entrepreneur, lived in the US for about 15 years. I'm a master's in operations research. My MBA was in energy management and R&D management. I'm a practicing advocate with matters in the High Court and the Apex Court and the tribunals, the company tribunals. And I'm also a qualified company secretary and a patent lawyer. So with that background, let's switch over to the topic, and let me just move on to my PowerPoint. Okay. Before I talk in greater detail about IPR itself, let's understand what is meant by property. Let's take this pen, for example. Now, suppose I were to be using this pen to write something on a piece of paper, that I would be enjoying the pen. That's the legal term for the way I'm using the pen itself. But of course, if I were to use the pen I would also need to be in possession of it. I would have to hold it in my hand or keep it in my pocket. So that's referred to as possession. If I have purchased the pen from a store, I'm owning the pen, so I'm in ownership of the pen. Now, on the contrary, suppose, although I have paid money to buy the pen, suppose the pen itself had been stolen by the shop owner and he had kept it in his store. So, although I have purchased it and on paper or in theory, I'm supposed to be having title over the pen, the fact that the pen itself was stolen would mean that the title, that the ownership has not flown unto me. So there are four key concepts with any property: enjoyment of the property, possession of the property, ownership of the property, and title of the property. These four criteria is always something that lawyers look at. So if at all one has a claim over property, or one wants to state that he or she has interest in the property, these four criteria will come into play. One is continuous enjoyment of the property, peaceful possession of the property, which means the property has not been litigated upon. Ownership of the property has to be absolute, which means nobody else has a claim or a interest or a stake in the property. And title, meaning if I'm an absolute owner with a clean title that has flown to me lawfully, I'm supposed to be having a marketable title. Now, what exactly does property rights refer to? When I say I'm owning a property, I'm basically having rights over the property. And those rights are a bundle of rights. And what are these bundle of rights? One, I can use it, I can possess it, I can retain the fruits of that property. Suppose I own an apartment and I rent the apartment. So the rent that I earn on the apartment is the fruit of that property, right? I can gift the property, because if I'm owning the property absolutely, there is no other owner other than me. So I can gift it. I can assign rights over the property. I can make changes to the property, enhance the property, improve it, rent it, lease it, license it, sell it, dispose, and even destroy it. So whenever somebody talks about property rights, it is this bundle of rights, exclusive or joint rights, that one would be talking about. Classification wise, there is tangible property and intangible property. Tangible property is physical, which means you can possess it, you can own it, you can feel it. It's intangible would be generally intellectual property, and in intellectual property, patenting is something that I'm sure you would have heard about. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, customer database. So all of this is considered to be intangible because you cannot touch it. It's virtual, it's not physical. uh, and then of course in tangible property you have movable property and immovable property. Movable property would be chairs, desks, tables, etc. And immovable property, as one can imagine, would be land, buildings, so on and so forth. Now, why would anybody want to own intellectual property? What is the advantage that they would get out of it? Especially if, let's say, you are a company. Why would a company want to file a patent and own a patent? What's the reason for it? Here is a chart which looks at the top 500 corporations in terms of market value, and look at the tangible and intangible asset value of those 500 companies. S&P 500 is Standard and Poor's 500. This is a global list that is released annually. So 70 in 1975, 17% of this total market value of the top 500 corporations was intellectual property. Which means 83% was contributed, of valuation of these companies was contributed by tangible property, that is physical assets like factories, buildings, etc. If you go on and if you look at 2010, 80% of the total value of companies is actually intangible today. So over the last 40, 50 years, the percentage of intangible versus tangible has been increasing, right? And so consequently, intangible property or intellectual property constitutes a major asset class. It can be used both as a shield and a sword. The shield is to ensure that nobody else can infringe this intellectual property, and if somebody does, you can use it as a sword to sue them in a court of law and seek damages. So the advantage with intellectual property is that it is a major contributor to business value. And the higher the intangible property, the portfolio of IP that a business has, the higher premiums, margins, profitability that the company can command in the marketplace. And on top, the especially IP rights like trademarks and copyrights contribute to delivering a sense of trust in the marketplace about who you are. Branding is a extremely vital component of intellectual property, and branding is something that businesses create to ensure that there is trust with that associated with the name, and that trust in the marketplace gives companies a distinct competitive leverage in the market. And on top of that competitive advantage that they get, they can also command a premium in the market. What are the different types of intellectual property? I just talked about it: patents, trademarks, registered designs, that is product designs, copyrights, confidentiality, or trade secrets, plant varieties. There are also other classes referred to as community intellectual property. Geographic indications is one, is a typical community IP right that one would possess. In terms of statutory provisions, patents is governed by all these statutes that are there: Patents Act 1970, and then the rules are there, Patent Cooperation Treaty, so on and so forth. Trademarks is again 1999 Act in India that would be applicable for trademarks. Designs is the Design Act, Copyrights Act. Confidentiality does not have a separate legislation, but then it is accounted for under the Indian Contracts Act. Trade secrets is again the Contracts Act is what would govern trade secrets. And then finally, plant varieties, geographical indications, Protection of Plant Varieties Act, Convention of, all these statutory provisions are there that can be used to ensure that not only can you protect your own intellectual property rights, but you can enforce those rights. Which means if somebody were to infringe, transgress those rights, violate those rights, you can seek remedies under these various acts in a court of law. Why would anybody want intellectual property in a company? The answer is very simple. Every company at the end of the day is there to achieve certain goals, every business for that matter. And those goals typically could be create wealth for its investors, for its owners, higher profits, so on and so forth. Basically, it is about creating value, not only in the marketplace, but also for the stakeholders. So the best way of looking at it is what I refer to as 3P, 3S, and 3D. These are generally the goals or the objectives with which businesses are run. 3P, higher productivity, higher profitability, and predictability of business are the 3Ps. These are the business fundamentals, the 3P, 3S, and the 3D. 3S is always about scalability, sustainability, and in the long term, survival of the business. 3D is de-risking. Any business that you run, it is vital, it is essential for you to de-risk the business, because risks are inherent in every business. And I know as commerce students, you would be familiar with this and you would have studied it. And in a business, because every business is an organized activity, decision making is vital. And if you were to look at the last 100, 200, 300 years, there is a continuous movement towards using into information technology and digitizing businesses. Digital revolution is what we are seeing. So this 3P, 3S, 3D is a kind of a framework that one can have in mind whenever you think of business, and the reasons for why one would be in business, and what kind of goals one would like to have for any given business. Now, I also mentioned earlier that there are risks associated with businesses, and these are inherent. The first and foremost risk that one would have is the technology risk. Basically, technology risk is about when I have an idea, can I, let's say it's a product idea, can I actually manufacture the idea? Can I, it's an idea, great, on paper it looks great, the design, the plan, it's all perfect, but will it actually work? That's basically a technology technology risk that is there inherent in business. Then when you launch the product, there is a certain market risk. And the market risk is about the design being accepted, the design being attractive, the market entry itself, which means the market has to be receptive to the product itself. So that's again a risk that is there. And once you've started selling the product, and which means you've gone to market, there is always a risk associated with delivery. So once you begin delivery of your products, there is growth risk that is there. Will you be able to continuously, year on year, quarter on quarter, keep growing? That's a risk that is there. Will you be able to penetrate the market? Will you be able to sell in different geographies, which means saturate the market? To what extent will your customers be loyal to you? What kind of support will you extend to them? All this is part of your delivery risk. And finally, there is a risk in the long run associated with your business itself, which is the survival risk. And survival is always about managing your cash flows well, your goodwill that is associated with the business well. And then I talked about the business fundamentals earlier, about the business fundamentals, that is 3P, 3S, and 3D. So keeping that in mind, these are the different types of risks that one would want to mitigate, that is reduce. So from a business standpoint, the key success factors, if one were to look at it, and map product and technology risk, the first thing that you have to ask yourself as businessmen or future entrepreneurs is the product useful? You have an idea and you think there is a demand for such an idea in the market, but ask yourself the question, is it desirable for anyone, or who is it desirable for? And once you're convinced that yes, the product or the idea that you have would be desirable, is it feasible? Which means, can I manufacture the product? Is it manufacturable? And then when it comes to market risk, you would ask yourself, what is my competition? Who am I going to compete against? Will people pay for this kind of a product, this kind of a solution, or this kind of a service? Financial risk is related to viability of the business model itself. So here you would look at at your target audience, your market, segments of the market, how you differentiate your product, how you position your product, and there are a whole host of related marketing activities. It could be product promotion, it could be pricing, it would be go-to-market strategy. So all this would translate into the financial risks associated with your business. And finally, the operations risk, which would be, can I sustain my business over the long run, and can I make it sustainable? So actually, if you look at it, there is only a small overlapping part which is here. All four bubbles intersect. So that area is an effective opportunity. So whenever you think in terms of a business, make sure you look at these, you view the business from this prism of risk, product technology risk, market risk, operations risk, and financial risk. The essence of any business, for that matter, because we know there are risks associated with business, and there is competition, there is uncertainty in the environment, It's a dynamic world outside. Interest keeps changing, needs of customers keep changing, statute keeps changing, everything is changing. So every business ideally wants to create entry barriers, market entry barriers. Sometimes government itself will create entry barriers by maybe imposing a higher customs duty on an imported good, or by protecting a certain business, making sure that that business, everybody cannot enter, basically ensuring that there are no market forces at play in that, for that particular industry. Or it could be in terms of internal economies of scale, that larger businesses that itself would, they can use it, they can leverage their economies of scale to make sure that there is a barrier to entry for other people wanting to get into that business and become competitors. Then asset specificity is also a way in which businesses can ensure that there is a barrier that they create for other competitors to enter. And finally, patents and proprietary knowledge, that is intellectual property, is another barrier that people use or businesses use to ensure that the competitors don't enter. And even if they enter, they can litigate against them, and basically sue them for infringing property rights that are there. So effectively, all businesses are not only looking at capturing market, but also retaining market. Because for me, if I have to be successful in business, it is absolutely vital that I wield a certain competitive advantage, a leverage in the market, which will help me stand out from the crowd. Because in any marketplace, competition is guaranteed. There are competitors, and it's a large number of people trying to compete for the same market, the same potential that the market has. Uh, and it is vital for every business to distinguish itself from the rest of the competition, and that provides competitive advantage. And patents and intellectual property is one of the ways in which you leverage your competitive advantage. And the objective is, at the end of the day, you're in business to create value and create wealth. And the value and wealth creation has to be sustainable over a period of time, otherwise businesses will fail, right? So with this background, let me move into the three main categories of intellectual property rights that you as businessmen and business managers would be interested in. First and foremost is patents. Why would anybody want to file patent applications and possess patents? The reason for that is, from a technology standpoint, a patent is granted to the inventor in recognition of a new invention, new idea that he or she has come up with. So that's the reason why somebody would want to patent protect an idea, because it is so unique that the idea that you've come up with, you don't want others to copy the idea. So if the idea has to be unique, it obviously has to be original, which means only people who have come up with the idea first will be able to, I mean, anybody can file for a patent, but only the first person would be granted the patent. From a business standpoint, any industry or business that owns patents basically can attract investment, because if I hold a patent, it basically means that I have exclusive rights over that intellectual property, the patent itself. And which means, since it is intellectual, since it is exclusive, and there is a need, because it is useful, the idea itself is useful to the market, people would want to invest in the manufacture of that product and the marketing of that product, right? So in a way, the patents that I hold will generate profits for me. It will generate a return on my investment. Why? Because it gives me an exclusivity. Nobody else, if I'm holding a patent for a certain idea, nobody else can copy that idea and manufacture the same product and market it in the marketplace. So it makes me more competitive in the market. And how does somebody come up with ideas and determine which idea to file a patent application for? I mean, if you were to look around products in your everyday life that you use, there is a trend in technology towards miniaturization. You know, humans are mobile beings, so we keep moving around. So I may want to carry a gadget with me. So so that's another way in which innovation happens. Ideas, people come up with ideas. There may be multiple products that I may want to merge. A 2-in-1, a 3-in-1, is a classic example. It merged a transistor with a record player. So those kind of mergers, basically multiple products that are combined together to come up with a new category of products. So that's another way in which innovation happens and patent protection happens. Marketing itself can come up with ideas that a company, a business may want to protect. Every product is continuously undergoing a series of improvements and modifications. So those improvements and modifications can also be patent protected. If you look at the way technology evolves, anything that is manually done generally gets mechanized. Something that gets mechanized gets you, instead of using mechanical power, you use electrical power. And once you have electromechanical gadgets, you try to embed electronics into it. And when you have integrated electronics, you would think in terms of using chip design and miniaturization and smart, using artificial intelligence, making it smart, focusing on UI. So there is so much of technology evolution and product enhancement that happens in this direction. New materials is another way in which ideas come up, and you can protect those ideas. Society itself is changing continuously, so there could be trends in society that could lead to innovation. And you may want to, when you come up with an innovative idea, keeping those changes in society in mind, you may want to protect the intellectual property itself. Business model is another way, medium in which something happens. Let's say till date you've been using a keypad on your smartphone to dial a number. Later on, you started using touchpad. Now you can even use voice control. So the medium for accomplishing an activity is also another way in which technology evolves. And anytime technology evolves, there is a new idea, and that new idea can be protected. And then a new process that you come up with, that also can be patent protected. Whenever you think in terms of an idea and you want to protect, it is important that you think in terms of 4 criteria that are vital for protecting. And I'll use examples, real world examples, to drive home the point. Here is an example where manufacturer A filed a design patent for shoes with red soles. This was in France, and the red soled shoes were selling at $2,000 a pair, women's shoes. Somebody else looked at the design and they said, wow, this is a great design and it is selling like hotcakes. So let me come up with a red shoe with red sole. The whole shoe is red. Immediately, Christian Louboutin, which was the owner of the design patent, which is the red soled shoe, sued the manufacturer who had come up with the total red shoe, that had launched the totally red shoe in the market. When the matter went in for adjudication, and when the judgment was passed, the courts held that the design had been violated. Why? Because till then, all shoes either had black soles or they had tan colored soles. So just the fact that somebody thought of a red colored sole was good enough, was unique enough, was new enough. So the first test for patentability is novelty. Now, the whole idea itself has to be new, and the idea has to be original. It doesn't matter how minor or how trivial the idea itself is. Then, criterion number 2. Here is an example where one company, that is Perfect Web, had a patent for basically a email campaign. So how would an email campaign look? You would have a database of contacts with email addresses, with names, with age, with uh, uh, with income levels, etc. And depending on the product for which or the service for which you're targeting them for a particular email campaign, you may want to select that from the database of your contacts only those customers or contacts who want to be targeted for that campaign. So this, they had an automated software for this, software that they had developed, and they had protected it. Now Info USA copied this and came out with this same concept. So Perfect Web sued Info USA. But when the matter went in for adjudication in the court of law, the courts held that the patent itself had not been violated because the patent granted was too commonsensical. So one other factor that you must remember for patentability is that the idea itself should involve a distinct enhancement, an improvement over what exists, and that improvement should not be very obvious. So in this particular case, the court held that the idea itself was very obvious. Anybody wanting to run a campaign, an email campaign, would target only those customers who would be interested potentially in that product. So that was the whole idea. Now, criterion number 3 here is a shoe which had an iPod integrated in it, Nike iPod, an Apple smart shoe, which would give details to runners about the distance covered, the energy spent, the elevation, the speed, the acceleration, etc., etc., etc. So the patent obviously was granted by the office, and so the third test that you should subject your own idea to is this test of utility, usefulness. Whatever idea that you have, is that idea useful to somebody? So this shoe here, this idea that somebody has patent protected, Apple and Nike together, clearly is useful to runners, useful to people who are on a diet and who are on an exercise schedule to reduce their weight, so on and so forth. And this whole thing has to be not very obvious, and obvious to people who are familiar with that space. That's another test. That's test number 3 that you should subject your own idea to. Test number 4, and this example here is a perpetual motion device, generally, which is a little, which is a theoretical contraption. It will continue once you set the device in motion. It will continue working without stopping. That's the basic idea. It is a theoretical thing. Generally, it is considered to be abstract because every machine over a period of time, if you don't supply external power to it, will come to a halt, right? So abstract ideas generally are non-patentable. So the acceptance criteria, the fourth acceptance criteria is the idea should be concrete. It should not be abstract. And that concreteness of the idea means that one should be able to manufacture it and actually use it, given the specifications that are there for that gadget, right? Then along with the acceptance criteria, there are a series of rejection criteria that one has to keep in mind. The example here is on top, there is this device that is there. It's basically a bulb changing. It's an automated device for changing bulbs. So which means the device itself needs to be held up, and then there would be some kind of a jig that would attach to the bulb and remove the bulb and then replace it with a new bulb, right? And the second picture that is down there is a pump kind of a device for exercising the jaw muscles. Both these, the office held, were silly inventions, silly ideas. They were frivolous. So any idea that is silly, that the office thinks is silly, it will reject it. So even if you file for a patent, the application will get rejected. Rejection number 2 is again an example where there was a distinct shape used for a particular product, vodka in this case. The bottle itself was skull shaped. So because it was skull shaped, it suddenly became very attractive for young 12, 13 youngsters, young children. And they started buying vodka bottles just to own that skull shaped bottle. The government held that this was not in interest of people, and it was not being not in interest of society. They cancelled that design patent itself. So any application, any idea that is against public policy and morality will be rejected by the office. The third rejection criteria, the example here, is a centrifugal birth machine. The idea is if somebody is a pregnant lady gets strapped onto this machine and the machine itself gets rotated, like these astronauts who are being trained, they get rotated to subject them to higher gravitational force, right? And that will assist the delivery of the baby is the whole idea. But you can imagine the risks that are there. Nobody knows what kind of health risks such a device would pose, not only on the mother but also on the unborn child. So any idea that is against public health will get rejected. So which also includes any idea that poses a risk to public health, to the health of people. So today, if somebody were to come out with a COVID vaccine, unless and until that vaccine is tested thoroughly and the safety of that vaccine when it is used on humans is determined, the office will not patent protect it, right? Then there are several such rejection criteria. I've just listed a few more. Any discovery is generally rejected. If you file a patent application for protecting a discovery, let's say there is a 10th planet in the solar system that you discover, and you want to file a patent application for it, and it will reject because it already existed. There is nothing new that you have come up with. Atomic energy related in India is rejected. The statute, that is the law itself, forbids anybody from holding an atomic energy related patent. Agricultural method, which means grafting two plants, getting different color, different shape of fruit, all that is something that nature is working on. You are only doing it trial and error. So they won't protect it. Mathematical algorithms, they don't get protected. So there are several such rejection criteria. So whenever you think in terms of a idea and you want to patent protect, that is protect that intellectual property, you would want to think in terms of not only the acceptance criteria but also the rejection criteria. In a nutshell, holding a patent gives you a 20-year exclusivity on commercially utilizing that idea. Nobody else can copy it. And if somebody copies it, obviously you can sue for damages and compensation. Patent rights are generally a territorial right, which means if you want to protect a certain idea that you have to go jurisdiction wise, that is geography wise. So if I file in India, my rights for the whole of India would be protected once the patent has been granted to me. Similarly, US, if you want protection for the idea in the US, you would have to file it in the US, in Europe, in Japan, in South Korea, in China, in Taiwan, in Australia, Canada. So every geography, only Europe has a common European Union filing that it permits. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. So whenever you think of an idea, make sure that you are thinking in terms of the geographies where you would want to protect the idea. So the advantage with every patent, whenever you look at an idea, you've got to make sure that it is patentable. I already talked about it. Useful, novel, not obvious, technically feasible. And then you've got to stay away from the non-patentability. That is the rejection criteria. It should not be frivolous. It should not be a discovery, etc., etc., etc. So there is one other concept that you need to remember, which is provisional versus complete patent application. Provisional application is something that on which you have not identified the claims. All of patenting boils down to claims, and that is the key thing. Whenever you have an invention, you have an idea, what is your intellectual property in that idea is what the claim is all about. Trademarks, again, trademarks, there are different kinds. You would look at, I'm sure you would have looked at these symbols that people have used whenever they have written something. There is a text, and on top there would either be a TM or an R. It basically means that there is trademark protection. It could be a logo, or it could be a image, or it could be a design, a certain way in which you present textual text, or a name, or a brand name, or brand. That's how you that's what you would try to protect through a trademark. It could also be an expression. FedEx is actually shortened for Federal Express. So why would anybody want to protect a trademark? Again, through trademarking, you are trying to make sure that in the market there is recognition, instant recognition. Somebody looks at the Apple logo, they know it is an Apple product, and that recognition creates distinctiveness. It helps you stand apart from your competitor. It helps you create an exclusive image about your brand, about your product, and it helps you differentiate in the marketplace. All this recognition, this differentiation, exclusivity helps you enhance value. There is a perception that you create about a higher value. Somebody buying Apple, they know the quality is good, there is a guarantee of performance, uh, and there is also an image that I convey about myself when I hold an Apple iPhone in my hand. So that's the reason why somebody would spend a lot of money protecting trademarks. It creates a goodwill. It helps me price my products higher. It helps me become more profitable in my business. And at the end of the day, the objective of a trademark, or generally of all intellectual property, is to make sure that there is competitive advantage and wealth creation. Corporate branding, corporate image creation is what you're aiming for. Same thing with copyrights. The reason why anybody would want to hold copyright on literary works that they have created, be it a movie, be it a song, be it an audio recording, be it a dialogue, be it a novel, a story that has been published, or an article that has been published, is again that same thing of recognition in the marketplace. You are the creator uh, of that artistic element, wants to ensure that nobody else can copy this same thing, and there is recognition about that particular creation, that literary or musical or artistic creation that the person has come up with. And because there is that uniqueness and it is protected, others can't copy it. So if I am a film producer, I don't want pirated DVDs to be used. So it helps me monetize my creation better. And it also promotes culture, simply because anything that is copyrighted will sell in the marketplace. And because there is money, and there is value that is being delivered in the marketplace, and wealth that is being created, other artists would also want to get in, and they will come up with their own albums, they will market it, they will put it on post it on YouTube, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, all of this is to make sure that there is a barrier, a lawful barrier that is created, especially in case of copyright, to ensure that there is no counterfeiting, there is no piracy. Piracy it's prevented. Then infringement, anytime somebody infringes, there is recourse to legal action that one can resort to. So it discourages others from copying that same creativity that somebody else has created. People are free to creatively come up with their own products and their own creations, but copyright ensures that others cannot simply replicate what others have produced. So this gets me to the end of it. There are obviously other intellectual property that are also there, and one would want to protect it. But these are the three things, as students of commerce and business, you need to make sure that these three uh, elements of, or classes of intellectual property, you always have in your mind, and you do make sure that uh, these three classes or categories are well protected in your business. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Sir, that was really very wonderful presentation. and even the viewers have diving deep to the real thing. So now we could just sum it up in three E's. So that's what I have discovered. So that is exploitation, exploration, and exceptions. So this
Right,
what we could sum up with the IPR. So
right.
throwing some light on the practicality. So I have a couple of questions to take here. So here, inventions or ideas from young mindsets are nowadays being acquisited or acquired by high purchasing power. So what's your take on this, and how in the practical world or in the court of law it is there?
Just please repeat the question because in between I lost a little bit.
Okay. So the inventions that are being into the market by young
Right,
mindsets are acquisited or acquired by high purchasing
right,
powers.
right, right,
Yes, sir.
right. Okay. Again, if a idea, if a startup has protected its intellectual property well, which means it holds a portfolio of patents on the idea. The advantage with patenting is exclusive use that the inventor can put it to, which means nobody else can use those ideas in a product and market it and commercially exploit it. So which means there is business value behind the idea, hidden in the idea itself. And so when somebody wants to acquire a startup which holds a portfolio of patents, they value, even if the startup itself is loss making, it has not become cash positive, even when the startup is not even generating revenues, some of these startups get acquired. Why? Because of the intellectual property. Remember, right at the beginning I had put up one slide which showed that in 2010 the ratio of tangible versus intangible assets of the world's largest companies was 80-20. Intangible was 80, tangible 20. Today it is upwards of 85%. So if you were to take a Google, for example, a Google with its $1 trillion valuation or thereabouts, or Apple for that matter, almost 85 to 90% of all that is intellectual property. So what is the tangible property? If you were to take a summation of written down value, that is depreciated value of all its assets, land that it holds, buildings that it holds, movables that it holds, cash in the bank that it holds, it will be 10 to 15% of the total value of Google. So in a way, market value is, you will know as students of commerce and business, that the market value of a business is the present value of all future expected earnings, net earnings. So if somebody, so basically it is this IP that Google has taken the trouble of protecting and creating, which for the next 20 years nobody can copy. So that exclusivity is what is bringing value to the business itself. And this needs to be remembered. I will just add a fourth E to the three E's that you mentioned, and that is excellence. Look around all the businesses around you. The
Absolutely.
businesses that are excellent clearly have a strong intellectual property regime, and they protect their assets, they create intellectual property assets, and they defend those assets very, very seriously and vigorously. Okay. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, exactly, sir. So the takeaway for
Okay.
the young mindsets entrepreneurs out there is to study about the IPR and really get into it. So because your inventions are far more valuable than the purchasing powers which are exploiting you. So the next
Right.
question may be a basic one for you. But incubations and makerspace startup hubs play a vital role in getting the ideas into the real world. So, what, according to you, in the reality is the unfair trade practices or their policies that benefits the young minds?
Okay. See, I mean, you have accelerators, you have incubators, and the latest term that people use is scalerator. You already have a business and there is some pilots that you have executed or some paying customers that you have, and you want to scale the business. regardless of the space, these are all, let's call them startup enablers. They're all part of the startup ecosystem. You may have hubs, you have hackathons, there are so many of these things. Academia is involved, industry is involved, there is academia industry interactions, all this is going on. But regardless of the it could be an entrepreneurship cell, uh, it could be an incubator, it could be an accelerator. The big failure that they have is they're all in the physical realm. They're all providing space, plug and play feature, they rent. So, but the real need for an entrepreneur is knowledge. It's more than knowledge, it is wisdom. And wisdom comes through experience. So the real need is for mentors who can help young minds fine tune their ideas, tell them that, look, this idea is great, but then this needs to be altered a little bit because these are the challenges that you will have in the market. So basically give them that real world input that the mentor himself or herself has gained through experience, and help them fine tune, tweak and tune their idea to make sure that it becomes successful. So the idea is about, it all boils down to startup mortality, making sure that today the startup mortality is very high. Almost 99% of startups fail. Even if I can enhance that or reduce that mortality rate by let's say to 90% instead of 99%, or it means that there are hundreds of startups that I'm ensuring that they become successful. And the key is mentors who are hands on. It's not enough to have mentors and advisors on your web page and say that, we are a startup and these are our mentors and advisors. It is important that you have on an ongoing basis, you engage with mentors, you gain from their knowledge and their wisdom, and you use it to improve your own business strategy, your own business model, and your revenue model. Every startup from day one, please think in terms of revenue model and business model. Don't think in terms of how do I get an investor to put money in. If you have a distinct, well thought out revenue model and business model, investors will come after you. You don't have to go looking for them. That's the one piece of advice that I would like to give.
Exactly, sir. Exactly. That served it. So,
Yeah.
last question. So, are there any new initiatives by the MHRD or Government of India in liberalizing the process of applying for the patents or diluting it?
Yes, there are many schemes that have been announced. One is, of course, uh, there are a list of patent agents who've been appointed and who are referred to as facilitators. So basically, they are agents, and they help facilitate the ecosystem. There are also refunds for SMEs. 50% is paid for all the expenses that they incur, the fees that they pay to the Director General, the Controller General of Patents. That gets reimbursed by Government of India. Then the facilitators itself, there are fixed fees that they can charge, because on the whole, patenting can be a very expensive game. I mean, if somebody were to have a really great idea or an invention which has a global potential, protecting that idea could cost not thousands or lakhs, it could cost crores, because you would want to protect it in Europe, in US, in Canada, Australia, all over, Japan, China, etc., and of course India. So that having been said, straight off for a startup, make sure that you engage, you try to learn a little bit about how patenting works, and then get somebody who can guide you, who can coach you into deciding, because patenting itself is, you don't go in and file an application for every idea that comes in your mind. It is a very strategic exercise. You don't rush. You should not, the last thing that you should be doing is protecting your idea just for the heck of it, because it looks good, saying that I hold the patent number so and so. You know, uh, on your resume. That's not the objective. The objective of patenting is to ensure that you can commercially utilize the idea in the marketplace. The objective of patenting is to generate a revenue off of it, a return on all the time, energy, effort, money that you've spent on the patenting itself, on getting a patent granted for your idea. So with that in mind, you can make use of many. There are also, for startups, if you're registered with Startup India, there are tax exemptions, tax benefits that you get. There is a there are SSI incentives that you get, funding that government of India does, state governments do. There are many schemes that are there. So what scheme would be applicable to you would obviously depend on the idea and the vertical, the industry vertical in which you would be, your business, you want to set up your business. So there are many schemes, and you just need to go visit the site, be it HRD, be it industry, be it Department of Science and Technology. They will straight away give you all the or even Ministry of Finance, they will straight away give you the different schemes that are there which you can make use of.
That was a wonderful session, sir. We are very honored to have a multi-specialized personality amongst us. That's again Kiran Betadapur, sir, who's an advocate, a company secretary, an industrial engineer, and a patent attorney. So once again, I would like to thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Indeed, that was a very great session. So hope all the delegates connected with us today and enjoyed the session and explored the much of it, like 10M paradigms and 3S, 3P, 3D rules. So that are some new concepts, but which are essential. So on behalf of KLE Society's Shri Jagadguru Gangadhar College of Commerce, I, Purna Pratnya Pandurangi, would like to thank our keynote speaker come resource person, Kiran Betadapur sir, and our beloved principal, Dr. D.V. Honaganawar sir, for his all-time support and motivation that helped us organize so many webinars and all the competitions. Organizers of this event, Professor F.A. Sheikh sir, I wholeheartedly thank everyone, and thank you audience for joining with us. And it's not the end here. So we are coming up with some more series of webinars in coming week. We have a lineup of speakers from overseas and also from various parts of India. So I would request you to register for the same. For the link is in the description. So and you can join us there. Thank you. Thank you very much.